So we'll just start. I didn't write out questions. I figured we would just let this develop organically. But if it's okay with you guys, we'll just start with, I'll let each of you introduce yourself, your role in education, and then just tell when did you start integrating coding into your curriculum, and how has that changed the way that you see students thinking?
I just have to know where in Brooklyn Julie is.
I know.
Well, I'm at the Multicultural High School at 999 Jamaica.
Oh, okay. Brooklyn's
Then I'm
a lot
heading
of
to
fun.
Williamsburg. Yeah, I'm going to stay in Williamsburg tonight.
Yeah, it's probably a better bet.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Well, I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Someone else go first.
So my name is Leah Lacrosse. I'm an 8th grade science teacher in Ohio, and this is my 21st year of teaching. In the science classroom, I actually didn't start my journey with coding in the science classroom. I actually started with it as a club after school. I wanted to get like-minded kids together about, I want to say like 3 years ago, kids that would just be interested in taking a risk with me with coding, because I had heard about, the possibilities of coding with other teachers. And I was like, well, why are our students in my district not doing this? So I started it as a club, and we worked through like all the Hour of Codes curriculum that was out there. And we started working with Spheros and the Lego Mindstorms and drones and coding drones. And it kind of like built into these students wanting to bring it into the classroom. So it was very student driven. They wanted to share their passion with the other 100 8th graders that I work with in the day. So I let them do like a 2-day workshop with my other students. And they ended up teaching like their peers.
No, Christine, this is only good if they have like.
And I've got a lot of feedback, so.
I know.
And what I liked was it like helped develop those communication skills. So my students were able to become the teachers in the room. They built their communication skills, and only like this much of it actually became about learning to code. It became all the intangibles of, learning to speak in front of a crowd, and then that moved into the science classroom. So I can, tell you more about that later. But
Awesome, thank you.
mm-hmm.
Okay, Rich, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rich Perry. I am an ELA teacher. I've been teaching 21 years as well. And oh wow, that was a lot of feedback.
That was a lot of feedback.
Yeah. Anyway, I've been teaching 21 years, and there was the opportunity, I guess about 4 years ago, to put in for a grant for Sphero robots. And my idea wasn't so much coding as it was to simulate aspects of literature with the students. So initially what I wanted to do was have them travel the path of the migrant workers in the Grapes of Wrath. And really I was thinking to foster sort of empathy between my students and the characters in the book. And as that progressed, coding just became the natural place to go with the robots. Because initially I started with the kids just driving the robots, and that seemed sort of a waste of material. So that moved into the coding because it just seemed so practical to move it forward. Really, one of the things that was problematic is I didn't know how to code. So really I needed that year to try and figure it out. So, I mean, that's really how I jumped into the entire thing. It was really just, it was just very fortunate that everything sort of lined up, because very few administrators are sort of like lining up to give me money for robots. No. So it really was, it was just a lot of luck and timing. And so far it's worked out great. And, it's gone forward really well, especially working with Leah on the stuff and Julie with the robots also, so.
Awesome. And I know, talking to you in Miami, when I became an ADE, is that we decided I was going to put robots in my classroom. So that was something that was a really powerful experience for me. And so you know, what you did pays it forward into other classrooms. And I think that's really cool. I don't know what is, Julie, where are
That
you,
sounds
girl?
like a fire. Is there a fire alarm going on?
I cannot wait to play this in my class for my kids. It's going to be amazing.
Well, what's funny is it really seems pretty quiet here to me. Is there a key to mute? Do you know? Can I put something on my keypad and mute?
I think I can probably mute you when you're not talking, and so I'll do that this next time after you. But go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll just jump in and out
and I'm not
around.
Okay, just so you know, I did move out, so I'm not standing underneath the elevated train right at the moment.
Praise.
So,
this is awesome. Introduce yourself, please.
So I'm Julie Willcott. I taught at high school level science for about 20 years in rural Maine, which meant even though I taught chemistry and physics, I taught a lot of other things as well, forensics, greenhouse management, even health. So like Rich, I got into using the robots, the Spiros that were provided to us as ADEs. And I used them first with my physics and forensics classes. And kind of, I would say it was a similar pathway, even though obviously it was science and not English related. But that idea of the coding as a tool to get the robots to act more accurately and not just be driving them. So, and actually what I do now is I teach at the community college level, and I do a variety of both professional development and writing of content. So for me, a lot of the thoughts about coding right now are moving towards even more towards the storytelling. I'm kind of getting into the video gaming side of it and using Bloxel, which is a really easy introduction into creating video games without coding, and then with the idea that, you know, coding maybe gets layered on, again, just like it did with the Spiros, as being sort of a more organic direction. So I guess, you know, I think that it's the great thing about coding for me is that how much it crosses all those different content areas.
And I think that's a really powerful. Okay, I'll mute you. I think that's a really.
You can mute me now.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I think that's a really powerful statement, though, that you make about coding as something that can cross-cut content areas and different curricula. Because I think if you've never used any kind of coding in your classroom, that can be the intimidating part. It can seem like, well, this is one more thing I have to use my time to do. So could you guys speak a little bit to how you've made those connections? Because I think, especially for my students that have never been in a classroom with students outside of internship experiences, that planning piece can be kind of intimidating. It can be easier to just like go to a website and find a preset lesson plan. And what you guys have done, especially with The Martian, is so creative. So can you talk a little bit about your planning process and your brainstorming process?
Yeah. And actually, I was just thinking the planning that I did with Rich with The Martian, and the planning that goes into using Sphero, like in the science classroom, like I actually think a lot of those skills were built back when I had fifth graders and I got a grant for Lego Mindstorms. Our content standards were to look at planets and how do planets differ around our solar system. And it's very fifth grade learning that could be very traditional, and that we all like watch videos and we do this and that. But I received a grant from NASA to get 5 Lego Mindstorm kits. And I didn't really realize all the programming that was going to eventually come with it. So it was kind of like later on, like, oh, wait. And then building that plan in later. So that was like the first experience with coding. And it was really intimidating because I didn't have the background that I thought I would need. But the key to that experience, and I think the one that I have with Rich now, is getting the kids involved as much as possible and being super honest with them and saying, like, this is an adventure for me as much as it is for you. I'm going to learn to code right next to you, and we're going to make mistake after mistake, but it's all about reset and trying it again. So like, I think when I plan now, I have that confidence built up, but I think that the confidence developed from just getting the kids involved and saying like, hey, this may be a bit of a mess at first, but we'll get there. We'll get there, right?
Yeah.
No, I have to say I agree with you on that, because I mean, I normally start all of these projects by saying, well, this is probably going to be a disaster, but let's do it anyway.
Mhm.
And again, it's sort of disarming the kids, especially the ones who are, I guess, predisposed not to want to get involved in this. So if they're willing to see me fall down and utterly fail, and I mean, I hate to play sociologist here, but I mean, there are times where, and I'm sure, Leah, you do the same thing, where, you fail on purpose and make sure they see it, like work on something hard, fail hard at it, and then be able to cope with that and just sort of model that type of behavior. So, I mean, the coding is nice, but it really is so much more than just, trying to get the coding, like, can they put step 1 and step 2 and step 3 together? It's much more about, can they cope with the failure that goes along with it? Can they cope with the emotions that they have to deal with that go along with that failure? Can they work together?
Mhm.
Can they interact with me? And then, like, as Leah and I have brought our classes together, like, my class is just finishing coding up the ASCII 2 message. So we're going to send it, Leah, we're going to send it to you guys Wednesday. So,
Nice.
her kids are then going to get the code, and, will it work when it gets to her end? Because the kids have put in now 5 days of work on this, which is, in the high school classroom, that's months of real time in their
Yeah.
mind. So it's sort of like, how do they deal with this? So, they know I'm as excited as they are to see this succeed. And I think that's the really big thing. I mean, the other thing is, I never really looked at it as coding. I always looked at it as, okay, I want the kids to experience the book the way I experience the book. Like, I can nerd out with a piece of literature, and I know, Jessica, you can do the same thing. I mean, you were sitting there in the ELA classroom, and that's what sort of makes us want to teach that content. So, but a lot of these kids can't immerse themselves in the literature without some sort of physical component to it. So, I mean, for me, it was always like, what is that physical component that I can make them experience within the classroom that's going to make them understand the frustration, the hostility, the interaction that the character's getting in the book? And then from there, it was like, okay, I want them to experience this. Now, what do I have to do? And, it was just like any other sort of like, so I never felt, I mean, I don't know if I felt intimidated by it, but again, I'm also not doing Lego Mindstorm coding because, like, I have one of those sets at home also, which I bought for my daughter, myself. And, like, it hasn't, I have not had the time to sit down and learn that, because that system is so much more complex. So, like, I think if you don't start simply, like, you're sort of setting yourself up to fail with this type of thing. And I think that's it. Like, start really simply, look at something you can do, have some sort of like really concrete idea of what you want to accomplish within your subject matter, where you are comfortable, and then you can move. And really, that idea of being ready to fail. I mean, how many times have you had a lesson plan that you thought, wow, this is going to be so great, and it tanks?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's no different with the coding. So, at least that's sort of how I've always looked at it.
So how's my feedback now?
Oh, you're great now.
Yeah, now you sound good.
Well, you know what?
Sound like you're in Queens.
Here's the deal. If one stands under a tin awning, it's not a real good place to do a Zoom call.
Now we know.
So now I've moved out and I don't have a tin awning over my head.
Nice.
But the other thing that comes up with lesson planning, and this came up kind of big time for Rich and I when we were doing a presentation on coding, is, especially if this is what your students are doing every day, when you pull it out, it may or may not work, regardless of how good the lesson plan was and how much it worked the year before. The technology is updated all the time. So, I mean, we had the experience of going to do a presentation that was going to be very hands-on, and suddenly, essentially because we had updated the Spiros to the latest operating system, which we were about the only people that had, they couldn't use the Spiros.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that regardless of how well you plan for it, you have to expect that anything could happen.
Right.
Right.
And
no, go ahead, Leah.
I was just going to mention, like, one of the big things to be confident in is that the content will get there. You will get your standards still taught. You know, you'll be able to check those boxes that those standards were addressed. It's just done a little bit differently, and I think that the more rich experience that they have with it ends up helping those content standards to solidify better for them. You know, my students, you know, they may not remember Lego programming now because those kids are like sophomores and juniors in high school. But they do remember the information that we worked with, and they do remember the love of science that they got out of it. And above everything else, if we can instill in them that passion for knowing, then we're doing our job regardless of what standards we're covering or whatever. So.
Right. I agree. That was probably the most powerful thing about using Spiros in my classroom, is that when, like, at the end of the year, a kid could still, like, preach to me about Ophelia's emotional state, you know, after her father dies. Like, when a kid who hates school is going to get that passionate about Ophelia in Hamlet because they did some robot programming, like, worth it, you know, worth the 90 minutes of my life, or, you know, or the planning that went into it. You know, I think that's what's powerful, is when they remember later. Yeah, because of those.
But then the other interesting experience, though, that Rich and I had at ISTE when was the work that Leah and Rich were doing was on display, and you know, we had all the glitz there. We had the actual floor plan so they could run the code. We had Spiros, we had Ollies, and there was this one boy. I think he was probably 8 or 9 years old. And he kept hanging back. Yeah, it was really funny. And he kept hanging back, and I kept trying to sort of engage him do you have any questions? Is there anything you want to talk to us about? And finally he says, well, I just really want to know, why do you have a chart with ASCII code hanging there?
Yeah, that blew me away. Like, how an 8-year-old knew, or he was young, but he had the whole ASCII thing down. And I mean, I can't tell you how to research that. So.
Right. And he could care less about the Spiros and the pretty pictures. It was like, you're really, you know, then he's asking me all these questions. Do I know what ASCII stands for? So, I mean, I think it's kind of that thing too about when you bring coding into areas where it hasn't traditionally been, it's going to reach some students that haven't traditionally been reached.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so will you guys tell me, as people who have a lot of experience in the classroom, have used that growth mindset, modeled that for kids, really made that failure clear, what advice would you give to pre-service teachers who in some cases maybe are, like, you know, terrified of failure because the classroom is very new? What advice would you give to them about coding in the classroom, about, you know, trying new things or innovating as young educators?
Well, one of the recommendations I can make right away is to get involved in professional groups. And I know my go-to is Twitter, because there are just so many educators on Twitter that are sharing their lessons, they're sharing their failures. You know, we like to usually say what we're doing wonderfully, but there are also times where I'll just go on and say, well, this was the big fat bomb. And, you know, you share those mistakes too. So knowing that you're a part of a community and other people are having success and failures with you, I think that takes away a little bit of that fear in failing and fear that this may not work, and being really reflective. I know I still take notes. I sketch on my iPad. I take notes on my lesson plans in Google Docs, but I'm always leaving myself little reminders. And so being reflective and then sharing it with other educators, those are my two big suggestions.
Yeah, I think you do need your own, like, crew of people that you can depend on when it comes to that, because I know within my school, I don't have the most receptive environment with the other teachers. In fact, they're sort of like, oh, you know, you're teaching, like the other English teachers are like, oh, that's Mr. Perry's robotics class. And, you know, I mean, meanwhile, my AP and Regent stats smoke just about everybody else who's teaching, you know, the traditional classroom environment. And I've given up saying that. But I mean, I know when I get that level of frustration, I can kick back to like Julie and Leah, or, you know, John Jark, or anybody who's within that little crew of people. And, you know, like I can throw the ideas around there and get encouragement with it. I mean, it's really important to find, you know, like Leah, you always use that term tribe. Like it's really important to have that professional learning network, or that little tribe of people that you can sit there and say, you know, I have this crazy idea, and, you know, what do you think? And they're going to cheer you on. And that's really what you need. The other piece of advice is probably not the greatest piece of advice from an administrative standpoint, but as far as I'm concerned, like the nice thing about our job is that you can close the door and try your stuff out. And I often close my door before I try one of these things out, because I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, an observation and assessment is still something that, you know, 20 some odd years in, I'm still sort of obsessive about. Like, if I don't get all of the highest marks, I get really aggravated, you know, like really aggravated, to the point where, you know, like I'm sort of like, I'll go in and I'll argue. I'm like, no, I hit that. I know I hit that. I've seen this
Rich is like speaking
before,
all
so-
of my truths right now.
So-
Like, everything he said is like how I was in my classroom.
But I think that's important. I mean, I had my cooperating teacher when I started teaching. She actually said she said to me, she was a little older lady, and she's like, Richard, remember, you can always just close the door. And she said it, and she was like, and sometimes it's good to lock it too. And you know, like that's one of the most important lessons that I got. So, you know, like I think that's really important. Like, I don't think I would, my first or second or third year, necessarily roll out a brand new coding lesson to see what happens, you know, especially when, you know, your career is potentially on the line. However, like, you know, have faith, you know, like everybody in your class, you know, like there will be a point. Like last year, I said to my chairperson, I said, listen, I'm trying this new coding lesson out. I've never tried it. Why don't we make that my observation? And she's like, well, how many periods will it take? I said, it's going to take 2 periods. So you're going to have to sit in for both. And so, I mean, I had her come in for an hour and a half observation. Normally my observation's 21 minutes, and I got a stellar write-up. But I mean, I was also very confident. I knew what I was doing. I had planned it, you know, to the letter, and I had thrown the stuff around with Leah and Julie beforehand. So, I mean, you know, like, have faith. There will be that point where you'll have that swagger where you'll be like, yeah, just come on in. It's all good. So, you know, and I think that's really important, because I remember my first 3 years, you know, which was the tenure process in New York. It was like, oh my God, I'm so worried about trying something new out, that I would practice it, that I would have like 4 lesson plans all over all that nuts stuff we do when we're starting this career. But I mean, that's really the whole thing. Like, you know, close your door, try it out, see what happens. When the kids see you're really invested in this stuff, they become not only invested, but they'll wind up being like the best cheerleaders you have. And they'll be like, all right, well, it didn't work today, but we'll try it again tomorrow. And, you know, like, so far, I have never had a standardized test that has ever been hurt by any of the coding we've done. I mean, it always lends itself to more logical writing, more logical thinking, more problem solving ability when it comes to any of the standardized tests that we've dealt with the state tests or the AP exams. So, I mean, I don't know if I answered the question. I sort of went on a rant there. I'm sorry about that.
Well, I think you did. Yeah, you did answer the question. And I think what you're speaking to, that computational thinking that's cultivated by the coding, like that it is the writing process. You know, that's what how I always rationalized coding in a literature classroom, is like, I'm teaching them the writing process. And not only that, I'm teaching them really meaningful revision, you know, whereas typically kids want to be one and done with writing. So if we can get them into that iterative process, then I saw a lot of carryover of that into their writing over time, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I think that works great.
So to play off of what Rich said, so today I had lunch with one teacher who's been teaching about 2 months and one who's been teaching about 1 year and 2 months. And, you know, their big question for me is, how long does it take you to be comfortable teaching? Somebody told me it was going to take 5 years. That's a really long time. And I think it's important for pre-service teachers to give themselves time. You know, that's part of my response to that. And it plays off of what Rich was saying is, you know, you're not going to get it the first time, and you are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Don't feel like you know, whether it's having all the new assignments or whether it's simply doing a good job with what you have. You know, teaching's a tough job, and you have to give yourself time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's really, really good advice. And I think you guys spoke a lot too. No matter how many years you've been teaching, it's okay to try something new, and it could go great or it could go poorly. And if it does, we'll try again tomorrow. I just think that is really a powerful message, no matter how many years you've been in the classroom. You know, that we have to, if we want kids to try new things, we have to try new things.
Right.
That's the other thing, especially with the teaching. Like, don't you guys think that if you were doing the same lesson plans at this point where we've been in the classroom 20 some odd years, I mean, I would find this job so unbearable. You know,
Right.
I mean, absolutely. And, you know, that's the funny thing. My chairperson said that to me because I was talking to her this year. I said, I'm trying this, this, and this, but I have to teach myself this, this, and this. And she's like, always trying something new. And, you know, like I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or not. But
one of those compliment salts.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's yeah, it sums it up. But how boring. And honestly, if I was bored with the class, why would I expect my kids to be excited to be in my class? So
but you know teachers that do that. I mean, you know teachers that are teaching off of that same lesson plan that they wrote 25 years ago, and you know how exciting their classes are.
Yeah, I know. I know. And they're the same ones that make fun of the stuff I do in my class. And I'm completely good with that. So
I think that's a good point too, is that there is some power in having that innovative spirit, because it kind of gives you this confidence to just be like, you know, I don't really care what you think about how things are going, because kids are learning and great things are happening, and we're just going to like keep on doing our thing.
Yeah.
Okay, it's almost 3, and I don't want to hold you guys up because I know everyone is busy and has things they need to handle. But I do really appreciate you guys taking time to talk with my students and share your experiences and advice with them. So does anybody have anything else they want to share about coding in the classroom?
Well, I'm going to share a picture of, I'm just going to share a photo with you that you can share of where not to hold a Zoom meeting. So I'll share that with you.
Please do. I'll put it in the keynote. Be like, this is where we were. This was what was happening.
I do want to say, though, that the confidence that you build with something like coding, it kind of spills over to other areas, because like I'm also the teacher that has 6 3D printers in the classroom. And so it's like, I have confidence in one area, it helps me with another area. And if you're innovative and you're willing to try things out, then like, I don't know, it seems to snowball. And like, I can give my students an experience in science, 8th grade science, where we're learning about things like earth science, which is not exciting, but we could be doing some exciting things with robotics, 3D printing. And I mean, there's just a lot of possibilities that if you try little starter activities, they build.
Yeah.
And write grants. That's my other thing. So that you can pay for all this stuff. Learn to be a good writer so you can be a good writer of grants. That's my
that's something I have to get better at.
Yeah.
Well, and you guys have gotten a ton of grants for the stuff you have in your classroom. I think that's what's so cool too, to share, is that like your schools weren't just like, here, let me give you 6 3D printers. Right. Or let me give you a set of Spiros.
Right. There is nothing in my room that has been given to me by my school. The iPads, the everything is all grant driven. So learning how to think big and then write concisely is a real good skill to try to work on before you graduate, because I don't know many schools out there. On that note, we're done.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much.
That was great.
Yeah.
Rich or Julie, did you have any last thing you wanted to share before we call it a day?
The only other thing I would say is document everything you're doing. At this point
Great
now,
point.
I'm running multiple cameras in my room all the time, and as high quality as you can, because it's one thing, like, I like putting this stuff up on YouTube to sort of like share it with everybody, and I find that very satisfying to be able to go back and see not only what works, but also see what's been, a complete and utter bomb. But I have found that to be one of the best pieces of reflection, is to go back and look at a class that's been videotaped. And it's not easy. It's dreadful to go back and look at yourself as you teach. I'm sorry to say, it's sort of like, oh my God, I look like that, I sound like that, all of this kind of stuff. But like, as I've been getting more comfortable with it, and the kids have been getting more comfortable with it, I think it really does add to the experience, to the point where, like, coding and everything that's going on right now is leading to the kids' next book. We're going into vlogging. So, like, they're building some of their confidence slowly with the coding, and then pretty soon they're going to be on camera, and it's going to be just sort of that progression. But document everything just so you have it, because you never know. I mean, I think everybody on this call knows how important it is to have good video of the stuff you're doing in your class, for presentations, for applications, for all that kind of stuff. So, and you don't want to miss one of those fantastic moments that happens in class if you can possibly, possibly get it on film.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, good point.
Julie, anything you'd like to add before we call it a day?
No, I think that's good. I mean, share your stories. I mean, we talked about finding stories, but also be willing to take that risk and get out there. For a lot of teachers, it may start with just going to a very local conference, because I find you're going to get as much out of sharing those stories as, your audience is. You're going to make connections. You're going to get response. And so, I think it's important that we all share our stories.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing your stories today.
Yeah.